Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today's episode is about word power. We're going to learn 10 new words that have to do with geometry. Now, you might think this has to do with math, which it does, of course. The words we're going to learn have to do with math and especially geometry, but you will see that the words we're going to learn from geometry can also be used in everyday language. And that's why we picked geometry for today's word power episode. And now, without further ado, let's start with our episode, and let me start by asking you a question first, and that's how I'm going to do it today. I'm going to ask you to guess the word that we're going to learn. Now, when two roads do this, there is often a stop sign or a stoplight to keep cars from running into each other. It begins with the prefix inter, and that means between or together. So, what is the word we are talking about? Remember, it begins with the prefix inter, so it's inter something. Any ideas? Well, the word is intersect. I-N-T-E-R-S-E-C-T. Intersect. If two or more lines or roads intersect, they meet or cross each other. Now, you can also say that one line or road intersects another. So, that was our first word, intersect. Now, let's talk about the second word. Now, this is the shape of a basketball, an orange, and the world itself, and it comes from the Greek word sapphira. So, what is the word? Did you guess it? Well, it is sphere. S-P-H-E-R-E, sphere. A sphere is an object that is completely round in shape like a ball, like the world itself. So, our word is sphere. Now, let's move on to talk about the next word. Now, this word begins with the prefix circum, C-I-R-C-U-M, meaning around. Now, a fence built on this part of a yard will keep a pet inside the yard. So, what is the word we're talking about? Did you guess it yet? Well, the word is circumference, C-I-R-C-U-M-F-E-R-E-N-C-E. Circumference. And the circumference of a circle, place, or round object is the distance around its edge. Now, as you can see, this word does come from geometry, but we can also use it in other things, in everyday language. And that's why we're focusing on these words today. And now let's move on to the next word. Now, this word comes from the Greek word parallelos, meaning beside one another. This word could be used to describe the lines on your writing paper, for example. Did you guess the word? Well, this might be easy because the Greek word is pretty much the same as it is in English. Now, the word is parallel, P-A-R-A-L-L-E-L. So, we can say that about parallel lines, but we can also use it for things or for events. For example, parallel events or situations happen at the same time as one another or are similar to one another. So we can use parallel not only for lines in geometry, we can also use it for events or situations. So that was our word, parallel. Now let's move on to talk about the next word. And here we will be talking about angles. Now this word describes angles of less than 90 degrees. It comes from the Latin word acutus, but has nothing to do with being pretty. It's not about cute, right? So, what is this word? Did you guess it yet? Well, the word is acute, A-C-U-T-E. As I told you, doesn't have to do with cute, it's acute. And acute, when we talk about an angle, an acute angle, but that's not everything. The word acute has a lot of other meanings, and one of these meanings, for example, you can use acute to indicate that an undesirable situation or feeling is very severe or intense, like we say acute pain. So that word describes angles of less than 90 degrees. What about the word that describes angles that measure between 90 degrees and 180 degrees? And this word comes from the Latin word obtusus. Well, it's very close actually. You should have guessed it by now. It is obtuse, O-B-T-U-S-E, obtuse. Now, an obtuse angle is between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Now, that is obviously the opposite of acute angle in geometry. But again, we can use obtuse in everyday language. Now, someone who is obtuse has difficulty understanding things or makes no effort to understand them. So that was obtuse. Now, before we move on and continue with the other 5 words that we have, let me remind you that I have left you a link in the description of this episode that will take you to our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. And there you will find the show notes. And more importantly, you will find our newest addition to our arsenal, and that is the interactive video. You will find it in the post on our website alongside everything else. We have, as usual, the show notes. We have interactive exercises and tests you can take on our website and see how well you remember the words. That's a very good way to master the words you're learning here. And we also have a PDF practice worksheet that you can download for free to practice even more, and then you can check your understanding with the answer key that we provide. There's just a lot to learn on our website if you take the link that will take you there, and you will find the same for every other episode we create. We add things to help you practice everything we're teaching here in English Plus Podcast and to make the words here permanent and part of your active vocabulary bank. And one more thing before we continue. If you like the content we're creating and you would like to support us to create more content like that, you can become our patron on Patreon. You can take the link, which you will also find in the description of this episode. That will take you to our page on Patreon. Become our patron and support us and help us create more of the content you love. And now let's continue and let's come back to our next word. This word describes the relationship of 2 lines that form a right angle, 90 degrees. It contains the Latin word pendere. So, what do you think? Well, the word is perpendicular. Perpendicular, P-E-R-P-E-N-D-I-C-U-L-A-R. Perpendicular. A perpendicular line on surface points straight up rather than being sloping or horizontal. If one thing is perpendicular to another, it is at an angle of 90 degrees to it. Now, this might be more related to geometry, but sometimes we need those easy geometry terms which we can use to describe things in our surroundings. And that is very useful, right? So let's move on now to the next word. If we say that the word horizontal means level, this adjective from the Latin word vertex means the opposite of horizontal. Well, what is the opposite of horizontal? You might have guessed it by now. It's vertical. V-E-R-T-I-C-A-L. Vertical. Something that is vertical stands or points straight up. And obviously, it's just the opposite of horizontal. And now to our next word. 2 shapes that match each other exactly are said to be this word. A word that comes from congruere, Latin for to agree. So, what is the word? Well, that might be a little bit difficult, I know. But what is this word? It comes from the Latin word congruere, which means to agree. You might have guessed it. It's congruent. C-O-N-G-R-U-E-N-T. Congruent. Now, if one thing is congruent with another thing, they are similar or fit together well. And as I told you, it is not only geometry. We can say, for example, they want to work in an organization whose values are congruent with their own. So we can also use that to describe values, not only geometrical shapes. But of course, the word originally comes from geometry. And now let's move on to talk about our last word for today's episode. This adjective comes from the noun cylinder. It could be used to describe a pipe or a barrel. So obviously it is cylinder, but what is the adjective? What is the adjective that we can use to describe this shape like a cylinder? Have you guessed it yet? Well, it's cylindrical. C-Y-L-I-N-D-R-I-C-A-L. Cylindrical. Now, something that is cylindrical is in the shape of a cylinder, obviously. Now, these are all the words that I wanted to share with you in this episode. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, and let me remind you how important it is to practice the things you've learned. You don't want to forget these words tomorrow or a week from now. And to solve this problem, you can take the link I will leave in the description, go to our website, and practice the words you've just learned. As I told you, we have interactive activities, an interactive video, a downloadable PDF practice worksheet, whatever you like, whatever suits you best, take it, practice, and make these words part of your permanent vocabulary bank and the active one, the one you can use, not only understand and try to remember what this word might have meant or not because you don't use them. When you start using these words, they will be part of your active vocabulary bank. Now, that being said, I would like to thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. This is your host, Danny. I will see you next time.